I used to know that man like I knew the lines on my own hands, every little habit, every sigh, every lazy Sunday routine. But lately, he felt off. He started coming home later, blaming deadlines I knew didn't exist. And his phone? It went from lying open on the kitchen counter to being clutched like a lifeline, screen always turned down, as if I couldn't possibly notice. At first, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was stress. Maybe he needed space. But then, I started catching the little things. How he smiled at messages I never saw. How he got up in the middle of the night just to check something real quick. It was that smile that broke me. Not because it was fake, but because it was real. And it wasn't for me anymore. One night, I passed behind him while he sat on the couch, and his screen lit up with a selfie. A woman, maybe in her 30s, polished, confident. I'd seen her before, at his office holiday party. She worked there. That's when the knot in my stomach turned into something colder, sharper, something that whispered, "You already know." So I started paying attention. Quietly. I tracked his social media likes, watched timestamps, even followed him one evening after he left the house in his cologne. And lies. I installed a small tracker under the passenger seat of his car. Something he'd never notice, because he never really looked at the things closest to him, including me. There's something almost surgical about the way betrayal unfolds. It doesn't come crashing in like a thunderstorm. It drips, slow, silent, calculated. A dinner alone, a laugh behind a closed door, a canceled weekend plan because something came up. Each one felt like a needle, small, precise. And yet, I was the one bleeding. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I didn't even cry, not right away. Instead, I watched. I listened. I waited. My emotions were loud, but I made myself quiet. Every time I felt the sting of humiliation rising in my throat, I swallowed it down with the same grace I'd served him dinner with. I had learned something long ago. Silence makes people sloppy. His routine became predictable. Tuesdays and Thursdays he left work just a bit earlier. Said it was to beat traffic, but the tracker told me otherwise. Hotels, corners of the city I'd never even seen with him. Places that reeked of secrecy and cheap perfume. I started collecting screenshots, emails, text messages, receipts. I organized them like someone building a case, because I was. I think the saddest part was realizing how easily he had underestimated me, as if I couldn't put two and two together, as if all those years of building a life together had dulled my instincts. But oh, they hadn't. They'd sharpened them. And the moment I saw that final piece, a hotel check-in with her name on it, something inside me settled. Not with peace, with clarity. I stared at the photos for a long time, not because I needed to confirm what I already knew, but because I wanted to feel it fully. I wanted the betrayal to settle into my bones, to burn through every last excuse I might have made for him. Each message was like a whisper in my ear. He chose this. And maybe that was the hardest part. He chose this. I didn't rage. I didn't storm into the room demanding answers. What was the point? He would lie. He would twist. He would beg. And I wasn't in the mood for theater. No, I was in the mood for clarity, for precision, for something colder than fury and deeper than heartbreak. I needed a plan, not a meltdown. Because what I wanted now wasn't justice, it was control. I backed up everything, every photo, every message, every map, ping from the tracker. I labeled folders. I even printed some, sealed in a discreet envelope tucked behind the books on my shelf. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it all. But I knew I wanted him to feel what I had felt, unseen, discarded, irrelevant, and I wouldn't rush it. So no, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply saved every file and started planning. I began looking beyond him, at the world he thought I didn't understand. His office, his boss, the little chessboard he thought he was playing on. And somewhere in that quiet planning, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. There's a moment when grief stops roaring and becomes still. Not because it's over, but because you've absorbed it. That's where I was. I had cried my tears in silence, hidden behind locked bathroom doors and long drives alone. But I never let him see that version of me. To him, I was the same wife. Warm smile, steady hands, dinner on the table. Let him think he'd won something. But inside, I had changed. I wasn't the woman waiting for apologies anymore. I was the woman mapping out every exit, every angle. I started watching more closely. Not just him, but his world, his office, his routines, the people he answered to, the ones he tried to impress. That's when I found out about his boss. Older, unmarried, respected, and very interested in women who didn't shrink in a room. I started doing my homework, read up on company culture, business articles, even those dry LinkedIn updates he liked to ignore. I learned who mattered and who didn't, and more importantly, who listened when someone smart started talking. And then I saw it. An invite on his desk, a corporate mixer. My name wasn't on the RSVP list, but that never stopped me before. So I showed up, hair done, dress fitting just right. Not flashy, but sharp. I walked in like I belonged there, and when I caught his boss's eye across the room, I didn't look away. I smiled. Not flirty, not desperate. Just the kind of smile that makes a man wonder, who is she really? The funny thing about charm is that people always assume it's natural, like some people are just born with it. But I knew better. Charm is a tool, a polished, purposeful thing. And that night, I wielded it like a scalpel. I spoke just enough, laughed at the right pauses, and asked the kind of questions that made him feel seen. Powerful men aren't used to being studied by women who don't want their money. That's what made me different. He was clever, I'll give him that. Sharp, insightful, with a dryness I didn't mind. But what struck me most was how quickly he noticed details. He asked about my background. I said I used to work in data analytics, which was true, a long time ago. I mentioned I left to focus on family, then let that silence hang just long enough for him to fill in the blanks. Men like him respond to restraint more than openness, and restraint was my specialty. After that night, he began finding reasons to connect. A forwarded article, a casual message on LinkedIn, a compliment about something I'd said during the event. I let him lead, not too eager, never desperate, just present, curious. And as the days passed, the messages turned more personal. A bit of flirtation, a longer conversation, the kind that lingered even after the screen went dark. All the while, my husband never noticed. Too busy erasing messages on his phone and inventing fake meetings to cover real ones, he thought he was playing a clever little game. But he had no idea there was a whole other board, one he wasn't even on. And on that board, I wasn't the pawn. I was something else entirely. There's a unique kind of power in being underestimated. It's like walking through a room full of locked doors, holding the master key in your pocket, and no one suspects a thing. As the conversations with the boss deepened, so did the curiosity in his eyes. He started inviting me to more functions, asking for my take on decisions, telling me things I suspected he didn't share with others. I stayed warm, insightful, but just slightly out of reach. It wasn't about seduction, not really. It was about precision, influence. I made him feel seen in a way my husband never even attempted, not because I needed anything from him, but because I knew exactly what I wanted him to feel: admiration, fascination, trust. And soon enough, I could see it in the way he leaned closer during conversations. How he remembered the tiniest things I said. How he stopped looking past me and started looking at me. And me? I kept my emotions on a tight leash. The anger, the heartbreak, they had become quiet fuel. I had no interest in shouting matches or shattered plates. I wanted something lasting, something that wouldn't just hurt, but shift the ground beneath his feet. And slowly, piece by piece, I was laying that foundation, calm, strategic, invisible to everyone but me. So while my husband was busy sneaking around hotel rooms, I was stepping into penthouses, not with desperation, but with intention. Because if he wanted to play in the shadows, I'd show him what it looked like when a woman learns how to move in the light. There's something intoxicating about being in control, not in a loud, aggressive way, but in that quiet hum beneath your skin when you realize you're no longer reacting. You're directing. That's where I found myself. The boss, let's call him James, had gone from intrigued to completely drawn in. He sought me out, not just in meetings or events, but in subtle, consistent ways. I had become the voice he wanted in the room. I kept things measured, let him see flashes of warmth, wit, a touch of vulnerability. Never too much, never too little. People fall for what they think they've discovered, not what's handed to them. James loved that. He called me refreshing, said I reminded him of the kind of woman who knew how to hold power without asking for it. I smiled at that. Because I wasn't asking for anything. I was already holding it. Our connection stayed under the radar, private dinners, not public dates, long calls after hours. He trusted me, not just because I listened, but because I spoke with intention. And when I mentioned how overworked certain departments were, or how one employee had been unusually distracted, I saw his eyebrows raise, just enough to plant a thought, a question. One that wouldn't trace back to me, but would quietly take root. I never said my husband's name. I didn't need to. A few anecdotes about someone being chronically late, missing internal reports, acting entitled. I let James do the math. And slowly, things began shifting behind closed doors. HR started poking around. Internal reviews were quietly launched. And all the while, my husband still kissed my cheek and called me darling, oblivious to the weight building above him. It's almost poetic how people miss what's right in front of them when they believe they're untouchable. My husband still strutted through life like nothing could shake him. Same cocky tone, same working late excuses. I didn't flinch. I packed his lunches. I asked about his day. I kissed him goodnight. He never once suspected I was standing in the very room where his career was being dissected. Meanwhile, James grew more reliant on me. He'd forward emails, ask for my opinion on proposals. He called me insightful, said I had a sharp mind and an even sharper instinct for people. I didn't correct him. I let him believe that, because every time he trusted me a little more, my voice gained weight behind closed doors. And soon, what I whispered started shaping decisions. The truth is, I didn't want to destroy my husband. Not at first. I just wanted him to see me again, to remember who I was. But that version of us was long gone. And once I let go of that need, something else settled in. A clarity that felt like stepping out of a fog. He had made his choices in secret. I was simply making mine in plain sight, wrapped in silk and strategy. I kept collecting, too. The affair hadn't stopped. If anything, it grew sloppier. Same woman, same hotels, different days. I never confronted him. Why would I? Every misstep was more leverage, more evidence, more reason for people to take me seriously when the time came. And trust me, that time was approaching, fast. It happened on a Wednesday, just an ordinary morning, coffee, toast, my husband fumbling for his tie like always. He kissed my cheek and left the house, completely unaware that by noon, his world would shift. That morning, James had sent me a short message. "Can you stop by today? 3 p.m. No details, but I knew. Something had moved into place. I walked into the office building like I belonged there, because by now, I did. The receptionist smiled. HR nodded. James met me outside the conference room with a look I couldn't quite read, a mix of professionalism and something deeper. Respect, admiration, maybe even pride. "I want you there," he said. That was all. So I followed him in and took my seat. My husband walked in a few minutes later, holding a folder he hadn't bothered to read. He froze when he saw me. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, not with anger, not with smugness, just certainty. He didn't know whether to sit or speak. And then James began asking questions about projects, deadlines, conduct. My husband stammered, deflected, lied, poorly. Then James reached under the table and placed a folder in front of him. A different one, thicker, labeled, tabbed. I recognized it, the one I had built, piece by piece. "Let's go through this together," he said. And I leaned back slightly in my chair, watching the man who once thought he was so clever, so invincible, begin to understand just how high the ground beneath me had risen. He looked like a child caught lying, not angry, not even apologetic, just stunned, mouth half open, hands twitching slightly at the edge of the table. I watched him flip through the folder, his eyes darting from printouts to photos, emails to booking confirmations. He didn't speak for a long time. Maybe because he couldn't figure out who had handed him the noose. He still hadn't connected it to me. That made me smile, quietly, inwardly. James stayed professional, but there was steel in his voice. "This isn't just about your personal life," he said. "It's about your performance, your conduct, and your judgment, in and out of this building." I sat beside him without saying a word, hands resting calmly in my lap. My husband looked between us, and something in his eyes started to change. First confusion, then fear, then something uglier, panic. He tried to talk his way out, of course, claimed the photos were old, the emails taken out of context. He said the woman meant nothing, that it didn't affect his work. James didn't argue. He just opened to the next tab. Financial records, hotel receipts during company travel, time-stamped discrepancies, everything laid out neatly like a story already told. All my husband had left were excuses, and even those were starting to sound tired. And then James said the words that landed like a gavel. "You disrespected this company, and your marriage." There it was, final. My husband turned to me then, finally realizing who had put this in motion. He opened his mouth, maybe to beg, maybe to blame. I didn't give him the chance. I stood up, slow and steady, looked him in the eye, and said, "Next time, think twice before underestimating a woman who knows how to stay quiet." The silence that followed was heavy, not the kind you fill with words, but the kind that settles into people's bones. My husband didn't say anything. He just stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Or maybe, for the first time, he was finally seeing me without the filters of convenience and complacency. Not the woman who made his dinner or ironed his shirts, but the one who watched, calculated, and acted. James closed the folder and gave a simple nod to the HR representative seated near the door. She stood and began collecting the documents, her expression unreadable, efficient. My husband blinked rapidly, then turned to me again. His voice cracked, almost childlike. "You set this up?" It wasn't even anger, just disbelief, and maybe a sliver of shame. I didn't answer. He didn't deserve my voice anymore. He stood, abruptly, like a man who wasn't sure what to do with his body. His hand brushed against the table before falling useless at his side. No one moved to stop him as he walked out. No shouting, no drama. Just the slow footsteps of a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room until he wasn't even part of it anymore. I watched him go without flinching. My pulse didn't race. My hands didn't shake. When the door finally closed behind him, James looked at me and said softly, "That was something." I met his eyes, steady and calm. "No," I said. "That was necessary." And in that moment, I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. I just felt done. Done waiting, done hurting, done shrinking. But I wasn't finished, not even close. I walked out of that office with my head high and my heart still. No tears, no gloating. Just this deep, anchoring sense that I had finally returned to myself. Not the self he married, the one who bent, softened, accommodated. But the version of me I hadn't seen in years, the one who didn't flinch in a storm, who stood her ground when the floor gave out beneath her. Outside, the city kept moving, people rushing by, phones ringing, laughter spilling from nearby cafes. For a moment, I stood there and let it wash over me. The noise, the light, the ordinary rhythm of a world that had no idea what had just happened 3 floors up. And somehow, that felt right. My story didn't need headlines or applause. It needed closure, and now I had it. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked, block after block, breathing in the late afternoon air, the kind that carries the scent of pavement and coffee and something faintly floral. I thought about the woman he'd chosen, what she must have known, what she didn't. I didn't hate her, not really. She was just another pawn. He'd fooled her too. But she would feel the fallout soon enough, because when a man builds his world on lies, it doesn't take much to bring it down. And while he was busy playing in shadows, I had learned to hold the light. That day wasn't the end of something. It was the start. And what came next would be mine to shape. Every move, every word, every step. Carefully, quietly, on ground, he no longer had the power to walk. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Offices are like ecosystems. Word travels through glances and whispers, through calendar updates and disappearing nameplates. My husband was let go, the official email said. Performance issues, policy violations. A clean, clinical phrase that masked the truth like a polite smile at a funeral. I watched as his name faded from emails, meeting invites, and eventually memory. She disappeared too, the woman in the selfies, not right away. At first, she stood by him, defended him. Probably told herself it was all just a misunderstanding. But reality has a way of wearing people down, especially when reputations start to rot from the inside. Within weeks, she asked to be transferred. I heard through someone that she left the company entirely not long after. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt finished. Meanwhile, I stayed close to James, but not as a trophy and never as a secret. He introduced me publicly now, in meetings, at board dinners. Not just on his arm, but at his side. She has insight we should all be paying attention to, he told the room one night. I smiled, shook hands, spoke clearly. I had stopped whispering behind the curtain. I was part of the room now, part of the architecture. But power, for me, was never about flashing it. It was about using it. I started working with the HR team on women's initiatives, mentoring programs, leadership development, a review of internal complaints. Quietly, I asked to see an old report, an intern, a file my husband once buried. I brought it to light, and I made sure she knew someone finally believed her. That intern, she was young, quiet, too polite for her own good, the kind of girl who smiled even when uncomfortable. I remembered her. I remembered the way she used to avoid my husband's gaze, how she'd flinch when he walked too close. At the time, I thought she was just shy. Now I knew better. He had preyed on her in the same careless way he did everything, thinking no one would ever notice. So I made sure someone did. I invited her for coffee, not as an executive, not even as a mentor, just as someone who had seen the worst and come out clean on the other side. We talked. She cried. I listened. And when I told her we were reopening the file and that this time her words wouldn't disappear into silence, she exhaled like she hadn't breathed in months. That moment meant more than any boardroom win ever could. Revenge, I realized, wasn't just about watching someone fall. It was about rising above the wreckage they left behind and building something stronger where they expected ruin. My husband? He was adrift. No job, no reputation, no affair worth clinging to. I heard he tried to reach out to old contacts. No one called him back. That's the thing about climbing ladders you didn't earn. When they break, no one rushes to catch you. And then one afternoon, I did something I hadn't planned. I sent him a package. Nothing elaborate, just a simple box. Inside, the very first selfie he ever took with her, the one that started it all. I had printed it, framed it, and stuck a yellow note to the glass that said, in my handwriting, "This was your beginning. Here's mine." I never heard back from him. No angry texts, no guilt-soaked emails, just silence. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to say. Maybe he stared at that photo, saw what it had cost him, and understood he'd traded a kingdom for a thrill. Or maybe he still blamed everyone but himself. I didn't really care, because the point wasn't whether he felt the weight of it. It was that I had finally set it down. These days, I don't look over my shoulder. I don't wait for apologies that never come. I walk into rooms and take my place at the table, knowing I've earned every inch of it. Not through manipulation, through precision, through patience, through the quiet power of knowing who I am and refusing to be erased. Not by him, not by anyone. And sometimes, when the building is quiet late at night, I find myself standing by the window in James's office. Now mine, at least part of the time. The city stretches out beneath me like a map, and I think about how, for so long, I was living beneath someone else's story, supporting it, holding it up, sleeping above a man who never once looked up to see me. But in the end, he played beneath the table, and I ended up owning the room.